Welcome to the first episode of the Bay Area Beat. I'm your host, Garrett Sharp Craig, and let me give you a little introduction about myself. I'm a passionate, some might say borderline neurotic, 49ers, Warriors, and Giants fan. I was born and raised in the Bay Area and consider Oracle Park like my second home. However, my first game actually came at Candlestick Park in 1999, where my parents carried me in at the ripe age of just 14 months. Now, I know with all the success the Bay Area has had in the last 15 years with the Warriors, Giants, and Niners, there are a lot of bandwagon fans in the Bay. But I can confidently say I am not one of those fans and have plenty of stories to back that up, which I'll get into in later episodes. My early childhood consisted of watching the Giants and the undeniably greatest baseball player of all time, Barry Bonds, who I will argue to my grave is the greatest baseball player of all time, fail to reach the playoffs every single year from 2004 to 2009. I watched the Niners take Alex Smith over Aaron Rodgers in the disaster of cycling head coaches that followed, as well as the Warriors outside that magical, we believe, 2007 2008 year, which is how I fell in love with basketball and truly was a magical year, but nonetheless, be the doormat of the NBA for over a decade. While the Bay Area truly has had an unprecedented run in the last 15 years with 4 NBA Finals championships, 3 World Series, 3 Super Bowl appearances, which I still lose sleep over to this day, I have been there for it all and will continue to obsessively watch and support my teams for this murky next stretch. Some might say it's ironic to start a Bay Area sports podcast in what is likely the worst stretch in 5 years. But I think it's a testament to the importance of believing in your teams and staying loyal, despite having an aging Steph Curry, a Giants team who is continuously getting lapped by its bitter rival. And yes, I won't even mention their name, as well as a Niners team that finds a new, unimaginable way to break your heart every single season. Now, let's get into what this podcast will look like. I want to keep it short and sweet, producing 15 to 20-minute episodes twice per week that touch on all the games, storylines, news, transactions, and yes, there's been a lot of transactions the last couple days that I want to get into. As you could probably tell from my introduction, my Bay Area sports fandom doesn't really touch on the Sharks and hockey. I'm fired up that we have a new face of the franchise in Macklin Celebrini, but it would be disingenuous if I came on and gave half-assed, half-baked hockey takes, and I think you would quickly realize that I don't really know what I'm talking about when it comes to puck. Now, depending on the season, I may give more time to one team or the other. Like today, I really want to focus exclusively on the Warriors and their trade deadline moves, whereas in upcoming episodes, we'll dive deeper into the start of the MLB season, NFL free agency. I'm also a really big fan of the WNBA as a rising sports league and excited to talk Valkyries here and there, especially once the season kicks off in May. Not to mention my girlfriend would kill me if I didn't give them their shine, but enough about me, enough about the show. Let's get into today's storylines. So, as I'm sure everyone is all aware, on Wednesday night, just minutes before the Warriors tipped off against the Jazz in Utah, they announced arguably their biggest blockbuster trade in the Steph Curry era, getting Jimmy Butler from Miami in return for Andrew Wiggins, Dennis Schroeder, Kyle Anderson, Lindy Waters, and a 2025 protected top 10 pick. The Warriors immediately then gave the 35-year-old Butler a 2-year, $121 million. Yes, $121 million over 2-year extension to keep him in Golden State until 2028, which puts him, Steph, and Draymond all on the same contract timeline. The move felt long overdue, as the Warriors had spent the years post-2022 making small moves around the edges, committing to their core without really making a big splash. But after 3 years of mediocrity, followed by the Luka shocker to the Lakers, the Warriors front office seemed more desperate than ever to make a move. You know, there were reports all week that they were calling about every superstar across the league. We saw that with Shams reporting. They called for Giannis. They called for Paul George. Really, anyone that the front office thought could turn them into contenders. Meanwhile, Jimmy's relationship with the Heat had grown sour as he, in quote, said, "I no longer am feeling the joy playing in Miami." And had actually already faced 2 suspensions from the team this past season. So, what are my initial thoughts on the trade? Excitement that they finally made a trade, optimism of what these 3 Hall of Fame players could look like on one team. But clearly, there's also sadness about saying goodbye to Wiggins, who played his best basketball during the 2023 finals, locking up Jason Tatum and being the team's second best offensive threat throughout the run. I know Dub Nation will always have lots of love for Wiggs. I know I do. And as Steve Kerr said, there is no 2022 championship without him. Now, despite what the raw numbers say this season, Butler is a clear upgrade over Wiggins and the other role players the Warriors threw into the deal to make the salaries match. Playoff Jimmy is a real thing. He's one of the few guys in the league who gets better in the playoffs as the competition stiffens up. It was less than 2 years ago that he brought an 8-seeded Miami Heat team to the NBA Finals, the only 2 times in NBA history that's happened. On his path, he knocked off the 1-seed Bucks and Giannis, and beat in the 76ers, as well as the future champion Boston Celtics. He did this not once, but twice in Miami. As in 2020, Bubble Butler took the Heat to Game 6 of the finals against the Lakers and LeBron and AD before coming up just short. Now, Jimmy is known for vengeance and proving people wrong as the 30th pick in the NBA draft. I expect Butler to be motivated not only to prove Miami wrong, but to try to win his first ring in what is likely his best team since the bubble Heat. This move also solidifies that the Warriors are fully committed to extending the last of Steph's window, which for years didn't feel like the case. But the best part of the deal, the Warriors didn't even need to give up any of their young core in making the trade. Kuminga, Pods, Moses Moody all stayed intact. And with the loss of multiple rotation players, it should give them more minutes and a better opportunity to establish their role in what is likely, or hopefully, a contending team. After all, there are only so many players Steve Kerr can give a DNP. But Butler should allow Kuminga to not only play the position he's more desired for at the power forward, he's always been more comfortable there. Allow Draymond to play the small ball center in crunch time, which is where they've always thrived, particularly in the playoffs. We've seen that time and time again, especially when traditional centers like the Rudy Goberts of the world get played off the court. Also, as a side note, I'm always looking for new ways to make fun of Gobert, so expect that to be a running theme throughout the podcast. Anyway, going back to Butler, his ability to create not only his own shot, but for his teammates should give shooters like Steph, Buddy Hield, as well as Moody better, more open looks. It may even give Moses the chance to start more and to provide spacing and defense this team still desperately needs even post-trade. Not to mention, trading Schroeder just months after acquiring him signals that the Warriors trust Pods to be the future backup point guard and run the offense when Steph is off the court. Something that has always been key to their championship teams. You can think Jared Jack in the early years. The best example of this is Sean Livingston during the peak days, and even Jordan Poole at times, while he was more of a 2-guard, was a great facilitator off the bench. I envision Butler's presence closest to what the Warriors had in prime Andre Iguodala. He may not always give you 20 or 25 points, and he's sure as hell not going to play 82 games a season. But he's constantly going to make the smart basketball play and make everyone's lives around him just a bit easier. He's also going to help the Dubs regain their tough, stubborn, aggressive defensive mentality alongside Draymond. And yes, I've already seen the memes of what a Draymond Jimmy locker room could lead to, but I'm going to assume, and trust me, this might get thrown into my face. I might look like an idiot, but I'm going to assume that these two guys will recognize where they're at late in their careers. These are two 35-year-olds. And ultimately, I think they're going to find common ground in the fact that winning a championship before retiring should come above all else. Now, with all this being said, stepping away from the optimistic point of view, I personally still wanted Durant, both from raising the team's ceiling standpoint as well as there's some nostalgia mix in there. Unfortunately, Durant did not want to be a Warrior, as on Wednesday afternoon, just hours before the Butler deal, Shams announced that Durant has no desire to have a reunion with the Warriors. When I first saw the report, I was immediately, frustrated. I was a tad confused and surprised that he wanted to stay on the Suns team that's pretty mediocre, essentially has no room for improvement as they're paying Bradley Beal the max when he's coming off the bench and not really producing. But thinking about it more, after much deliberation, I came to the conclusion that can you really blame him? Warriors have been a 500 team since the miraculous title run they had in 22. And while Steph proved in the Olympics that he's still a top 10 player in the NBA, the lack of offensive threat around him on the Warriors allows teams to double him all game, making his shot quality extremely difficult. But outside of him and Draymond, who's still the defensive anchor and best facilitator on the team, they have a bunch of mid-tier role players, a lot of whom have a very similar skill set to one another and don't really complement Steph all that well. Why are they in this position, you ask? Not to rehash some old wounds, but this all comes back to the 2020 draft when they take Wiseman in a draft where they could have traded up to get Anthony Edwards or even stood pat and took LaMelo Ball at 2. Reports at the time were that the first pick was available and Minnesota was not sold on taking Edwards. Either Edwards or LaMelo would have jolted the Warriors and helped them find their future two guard to pair alongside Steph and Clay, who was aging at the time and, as we know, ultimately not re-signed by Golden State this past offseason. Another player who could create their own shot and take some of the burden off of Steph has proven to be exactly what this team has been missing the past 3 years. We fast forward to following year in 2021, the Warriors take Kuminga over Franz, and while Franz is, the more polished player at this point in their career and fits the Warriors mold better, the Dubs drafted Jonathan based off his potential, which I still feel has yet to be fully tapped. The Warriors then took Moody at 14 when 3 of the next 5 picks were Alperen Şengün, Trey Murphy, and Jalen Johnson, all of which are emerging superstars in this league and have the outside shooting and playmaking that this 2025 Warriors team still desperately needs. And listen, draft mistakes happen all the time. Hand up, I wanted Wiseman. It just so happens that the one year the Warriors have a top 2 pick is the COVID year, where they're not even able to have the same access to prospects as in any other year. Not to mention, Wiseman only played 3 games at the University of Memphis before being suspended for receiving $11,000, which, as a side note, is kind of hilarious in the post-NIL world we live in today, where players are making $5 million to play a semester at a university. But listen, I get it. Wiseman's traits were magnetic. A 7'1" big man with outside shooting and passing ability seemed like the perfect fit. But it quickly became apparent that he wasn't able to translate to the NBA's fast pace, and he did not have the processing speed to play alongside Steph Curry. He was actually just waived yesterday as well, so it does seem like his career is coming to an unfortunate end pretty soon. But what happened next was genuinely inexcusable and why I think the franchise is where it is today. We move ahead to 2022. The Warriors are coming off an NBA championship where Steph night-nighted all over the Celtics. He dropped 43 in Game 4, tying the series. The Warriors never looked back. Of course, we all know the rest of the story. Warriors win in 6 in Boston, ripped the hearts out of Celtics players and fans alike, and ultimately proving once again that he is the greatest point guard of all time. And yes, that includes you, Magic. While you would think the team is, riding an all-time high, morale is great, instead, Draymond Green, the heartbeat of the team's defensive identity and their vocal leader for years, starts off training camp by knocking out Jordan Poole, easily the Warriors' best young player and their 3rd best player during that NBA Finals run. The punch and then the leaked video from a Warriors staffer in the aftermath initiated Poole's downfall with the Warriors, and you cannot tell me otherwise. It ultimately led to the team's dissension into mediocrity. In an effort to clean up the mess that Draymond started, the Warriors panicked. They gave Poole a 4-year max extension a week after the incident. Rather than letting him play out his last year of his rookie deal and give themselves an opportunity to assess another year of Poole's progression, and they had the bird rights to match any other offer he received in restricted free agency, the Warriors' hands were ultimately tied and were forced to give JP3 his big deal. Unsurprisingly, the team was never able to reform the chemistry of the championship year prior, despite running virtually back the same team. Sure, Otto Porter was no longer there, but most of the core was all intact. As we know, Poole took a step back offensively, partially from an understandable lack of confidence, and his defense is really what made him virtually unplayable in that playoff series against the Lakers. Meanwhile, Draymond lost his role as the team's emotional leader as he became the same bully to his own teammate that once made him feared amongst opponents across the league. At the end of that season, rather than standing by Poole, the franchise chose Draymond instead, giving him a 4-year, $100 million deal while shipping JP3 and his overpaid contract to Washington, along with a first-round pick and Patrick Baldwin for Chris Paul, which the theory there was it was supposed to give us flexibility to trade for a star with Paul's big contract. But as we know, it ultimately was just a failed 1-year rental. Without the punch, the Warriors likely never give Jordan the deal they did, allowing them to have the financial flexibility in 23 and likely sign Poole to a deal at a smaller average annual value. I don't believe Poole is the same player we saw in 2023 following the punch. I have to believe that as he developed more and had more opportunities to play alongside Steph, and particularly in Klay's role, that we would have seen his true potential rather than what we're seeing today in Washington, which, to give him credit, he's having a bounce back season. He's shooting 40% from 3, but he's playing a lot of meaningless basketball. And as we know, that's never good for a player's long-term development. Now, I'm sorry for the long-winded, sad-ish path down memory lane, especially when the fan base is celebrating the Butler trade, and as we should. He is an all-star, but I think it's important to recognize why the Warriors are where they are today and why stars like Kevin Durant don't really have any interest in playing in Golden State, and why it took Butler getting a $121 million bag to come on board. Not only is the team non-competitive with the likes of OKC, the Nuggets, and sadly now the Lakers following the Luka trade, but the same Draymond Green who punched Jordan Poole is the same guy who told Durant during his final season with the Warriors, "We don't need you. We won without you. Leave." And while Draymond did seem to have the last laugh in 2022 following the championship, I have to imagine their strenuous relationship is part of the reason Durant didn't want to go to the Warriors now, and even admitted in 2022 it's part of the reason he left in the first place. And look, obviously, it goes without saying, there is no dynasty without Draymond Green. He was at the forefront of a top-ranked defense from 2015 to 2019, which included a Defensive Player of the Year, and frankly should have included more. His ability to play with Steph and know Steph's every move and motion on the court is unlike any other teammate he's ever had. But this isn't the first, nor is it the second time Dre's costed the Warriors. Like the Barry Bonds argument, I will go to my grave thinking we win in 2016 if Draymond doesn't lose his cool in Game 4 against the Cavs by retaliating against his now best friend LeBron and hitting him below the belt, which, as we know, ultimately led to a 3-1 comeback, his suspension. Draymond's inability to control his emotions gives him his edge and is why he's had the Hall of Fame career that he's had. But it's also a big reason why we lost in 2016, why Jordan Poole is no longer a Warrior, and why Kevin Durant had no interest in reuniting in Golden State. Draymond will have a statue someday at the Chase Center alongside Steph and Klay, and he rightfully should. But many fans like myself will always have so many what ifs, many of which stem from Dre's lack of composure when it mattered most. But that's going to be it for me today. I hope everyone stayed until the end and enjoyed themselves. Although I know this episode, it might have been a bit painful to relive at points, might have not been the best for a pilot, but I genuinely am excited. I don't want to underscore. I genuinely am excited for what Butler's going to look like with this team. And I'm glad the Warriors finally recognize the need to make a big move while Steph is still Steph. The team was going nowhere fast, and with Jimmy, they now have a second scorer and a playmaker that we know is playoff battle tested. I'm just not completely sold that Butler is the piece to bring the Warriors to the promised land. But please prove me wrong, Jimmy. I know you love doing so. Next week, we'll dive a bit deeper into the Niners season in review, maybe discuss a little bit of Super Bowl 59 a tad, although, like many of us, I hope both teams can somehow lose. And hopefully we'll get into some more of the Giants free agency moves. But until next time, peace.